that I met Betsey about probably 5 years ago, when we were both doing a table at the South Dakota Heritage
History
Conference. And we were right across from each other. And I looked across and I saw these pictures of little rural schools, and I said, oh, do you know something about rural schools? And she said, well, I've written a book about them. In fact, I'm working on my second volume. She said, do you know anything about rural schools? And I said, well, I attended one for 8 years. I think I know from personal experience a little bit. And we have been friends ever since, because she lived in here. She worked at the Capitol at least one day a week in the gift shop. She had her own studio, art studio and writing. And I just happened to go down to the gift shop every day that she was working. So have a little chat. Yeah. So you take it from there.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I would like you to go around and tell me who you are, please.
My mouth
Sure. Maybe we should start at this end.
Okay. Mary Yeager. And I went to country school. It was called Bovee, South Dakota at the time. It was a country school. It's no longer there. And anyway, so I had experience with that.
My name is Naomi. My grandfather taught country school in Terry, Montana, and Windham, Minnesota.
Really? Sister Phyllis Gill, and I went to country school for 8 years. South Dakota.
Mike Coulter, and I've driven by a country school.
I'm Kathy Coulter, and my interest is I was a past teacher, so I'm interested in rural schools too. I guess my heart.
I'm Sister Lynn Murray, and I went to country school for 1 year, and my sister taught country school for a bunch of years.
My name is Mary Eiley, and I'm a co-journer with Presentation Sisters, which means I journey with them. And my mom started her teaching down by Winter in a country school. So she tells stories of, she's dead now, but
You've heard the stories.
I've heard, yeah. My mom was a kind of a character.
My name is Denise, and I'm Kathy's friend. And I know nothing about country schools, but I love to learn new things. So.
I'm Kathy Lewis, and I've been a friend of Kathy and Mike Coulter and Sister Kathleen. And my mom taught country school in a little school close to Getty, South Dakota. And she had told many stories, but one of them was that her brother and sister, who were twins, were in her class when they were in 8th grade. So she had some real stories about this brother and sister that she taught. She taught for 2 years.
That'd be a challenge.
Yeah.
My name is Jan Lenz, and I'm also a co-journer with the Presentation Sisters. And I've never gone to a country school, but when we rented some farmland, there was a country school on the property that somebody was trying to turn into a house. Does that count?
Yes, that sounds everything counts.
I'm Sister Suzanne, and I taught country school the year I got out of college. Had never gone to country school, so it was all playing it by ear, but it was a good year.
I'm Sister P.L. Murphy, and I went to Pleasant Valley until I was in 2nd grade, and then we moved in. I was in Richland 32 with the same teacher from 3rd grade through 8th grade, a man teacher, Mr. Wine.
And you just did yours for the 3rd volume, right?
I did.
Yeah.
And also, could I ask a little help with my disability? I can't hear very well, so if people would speak up.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm Sister Kathleen Byrne, and as I said, I went to rural school for 8 years, and my mother taught both before she was married, right out of high school, of course, and after her last child left home. So she was a rural school teacher for many, many years.
Oh, and so was my mother. I forgot that part.
My name is Conrad Otterness. I rural school, I attended for 8 years. And it was, what was the name? Hagee School District 126. And we had numerous teachers.
Where was that?
It was in Edison Township in Mayhew County.
Oh.
And it was a great time.
I'm Elta Otternuss, and I went to a country school in Pipestone County, Minnesota, called Trotsky. And it was actually in town. And we had one teacher in all 8 grades. And we had the best softball team in the Hi, Betsey.
Hi. It's so great to see you. It's wonderful that you came. Well,
One more.
oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm Jen Rothenbuehler. I work for the Sisters, and I attended a country school for 8 years as well in Lebanon, South Dakota. It was a three-room plus our lunchroom, I guess, country school. But yeah, it was a great experience. I'm excited that Kathleen introduced me to this project, and my story will be in volume 3 as well.
Good. Well, it's nice to have kind of a cross-section of people in this group. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Remind me to speak up because I have a soft voice. So we'll get going on this, and then you'll hear what I would say otherwise, if it'll work for me. Okay, South Dakota country schoolhouses. These are the first ones that I illustrated, kind of in the spot of the state where they exist, or used to exist. People ask me, how did I get involved in this? Curiosity started it all. I entered an art contest for AAUW, and I had taken a picture of that building, and I can do buildings quite soon, and quite quickly, and they needed it done right away, so that's what I chose. And when I showed it to a gentleman, he said he went to country school, and it was a country school, and he rode his horse to school. And I never knew anyone who rode a horse to school.
We drove a horse and buggy to school. Horse and buggy.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be in one of my slides, but I didn't realize that.
We brought the hay along for the horse.
Isn't that amazing? That's so neat. Well, the first time I visited an active school, I had a picture framing business in Pierre. And one of my customers, I showed her the drawing, and she said, oh, her kids go to a country school. So then I thought, this is unbelievable. I had no idea. So I went and visited the school, and took pictures of the kids, and then I did a drawing of it. So that was the first one I went to that are still open and operating. In May of that year, 2012, the kids came to my studio for a project up there, end of year field trip. And when they left, they all gave me a hug. And I was really surprised because I had only met them once before, and I wasn't expecting that. So I was beginning to wonder, there was something different going on with these kids. So then I was reaching out, the stories were coming from everywhere, and it's actually random. It's based on who I met, who knew somebody, and Kathleen is a perfect example of getting a lot of other people involved. And but I didn't know that I was going to be illustrating schools and doing a book. That was not a plan in the beginning at all. And you can see these schools are listed where they are. They're in various areas of the state. My background is different from most people growing up in South Dakota. I was a direct descendant of the Babson family who came in 1632 from England and settled the town of Gloucester, Mass. And if you ever see Wicked Tuna on TV, that's the fisherman that my ancestors were. And it's funny too, because someone said, you know, they sailed on clipper ships, and actually the prairie schooners were almost the same kind of thing as far as traveling and moving. This is my hometown. The church I went to, the train depot, and there were trolley cars in Cambridge, not in our town actually, but nearby. And the other building, I used to walk by that on my way to school, and it was built in the 1600s. Revolutionary War history is the main topic in our town of Lexington, Massachusetts. So that was kind of the history that I sort of learned by osmosis, if nothing else. The top left is my library, the house that I lived in, and my elementary school is on the bottom left, and my junior high school is on the bottom right, and they've built that into condominiums now. So you can see it was not too close to being a one-room school. And when I used to ride my bike or walk around with my friends, we went by Louisa May Alcott's house, which should be shown there. Henry Thoreau's cabin at Walden Pond, we'd go there. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Ralph Waldo Emerson, all those were right around where we went all the time. Never thought about it being unique or fabulous or anything. Of course, we were kids, and kids don't really, I never paid attention to history until I got old. When I was growing up, the students were competitive in the classroom. We had 300 in our graduating class, actually, and one thing, we didn't learn life skills. All the second graders would go out on the playground and play together for 15 minutes and then back in. It wasn't like we had a group of kids of different ages where we had to learn how to play a game or anything. The closest I came to farming, which most of you might have been involved in a farm, was to pick blueberries. Down the road, there was a farm, a dairy farm, and they had blueberries, so that was my farming experience. And a friend and I used to ride our bikes on to the Concord Bridge. It was 12 miles. On the way back, we'd stop and have ice cream for 5 cents. So that was a long time ago, as you can see. 15 miles from where I lived was Boston and Cambridge. In the map, or the picture with the river, Charles River, coming between. And we'd go to the Science Museum and Harvard, MIT, and you know, that was our backyard, basically. A lot of the parents in my elementary school were professors at Harvard and MIT. So we had a very elite education, I thought. So when I heard about country school, I was really thinking it was kind of be a mediocre. I couldn't imagine it being much. And now I've completely reversed my thinking. That, you know, you can learn French anytime, but you can't learn life skills as well when you're older as when you're young. And I think, you know, it's very valuable. So I've been doing this for 7 years and interviewing former students and teachers and visiting the schools. The first volume, the reason I got out here was that my husband got a job. We were living in Virginia, and he got a job out in South Dakota, and I said, "Where is South Dakota?" I really didn't have any information about it. I'd always ignored it, I guess. And so, so the first book, I try to describe a little bit about each county and the state, so that anyone reading the book will learn a little bit about it. And then in volume 2, I tried to see much more slanted direction toward the ethnic background. And why did your families come out here, and how did they decide to have country schools, and what was that? So in the second book, I have that kind of focus a little bit more. And I've added that into the third book. I'm doing the third last book. in this series. It will never end. It'll never end. I keep meeting people all the time, and so I just have to stop. So it'll be after the third book. And I'm continuing to add in the ethnic background and why did people come and how did they settle here. When you read the book, if you do, you'll notice there are a lot of similarities, but there are differences, and I try to put the years that the person was a teacher or a student, because a lot of it changed over the years, and so someone would say, well, we used to do this, and someone will say, well, we never did that, we did something else, and so it really changed over the years, although there were a lot of things similar. When I was typing up the first book, after a while, I didn't know if I wanted to type 2 outhouses, one for boys and one for girls again. Almost everybody had that in their story. And I have a questionnaire, so it asks some questions, and that was one of the questions. So a lot of the stories had the same kind of theme. And then I thought, no, these are all individual stories. This is their story. So I'm writing it as they wrote it, even if it's a repeat. And the games. And one of the things that surprised me, when I went out and visited the schools that are still operating, the kids play the same games their parents and grandparents who went to country school play. If you ask them, what games do you play? It's Any Over, Pum Pum Pull Away, Fox and Geese in the winter is a game. They play those still. I was surprised about that. Another thing that surprised me was that quite a few of the people over the years became the valedictorian or salutatorian in their high school. And that's a melting pot. That's where kids from all backgrounds come. So to have the valedictorian have a rural school background was interesting to me. That's another thing I wouldn't have expected. So the illustrations are one thing that I've enjoyed doing. That's what it started it all. And I love it when someone will say it looks just like it looked when I went there. Because some of these have been demolished by now.
Is it yours? That's why it looks like it.
So does this look like
that
when you went
looks
to?
just exactly like Richmond 32.
Oh, good. See? Yeah. Well, and there were some basic structure types, depending on the years that they were built. But then each school managed to have a slightly different bell tower or entry or whatever, something.
3 windows, entry, bell tower.
Yeah, see? Good, great. And that's, yeah, the structure of the books, someone asked me about that. It's West River, East River. I had to figure out how, these are all random. So I didn't just go to one county and get all the stories, and that's easy. So I made it a West River, East River divided by the river. It's not the time zones, because the time zones started getting really confusing. So I thought, well, the river is right there, you can see it. So that's how I divided it. And then it's alphabetical by county. And then within that, it's alphabetical by name, unless there's a group that go to Grover School or some other thing, and then I would put them in a bunch together so that you have some stories of the same school in a group. And what I wonder is whose idea was this, because it really wasn't mine to start with. And so I'm just following the lead of this project and really fell in love with the land and the people here, and consider South Dakota my second home. Basically lived in Pierre for 18 years and never lived anywhere as long as that. I've lived in a lot of places. And now I live in South Carolina. A year ago I got my husband to retire and moved away from the winter because I just cannot deal with that anymore. And now I live 2 miles from the ocean, which is where I grew up. So it's, you know, even though it isn't the area I grew up, it's the ocean. And that's what I needed right now. That kind of peace and quiet. And so I can work on the rest of the book. So for you that aren't familiar with what a one-room school is, I really call them a rural school because some were one room and some were more than one, but it was still that same system. And these are some in different counties, all looking different, and some had 2 rooms, and some had a basement. So that's those. And where were they? Well, and in the very beginning, there were 3,000 schools in the state. And what they were is 2 miles in one direction and 3 miles in the other direction, you would have a school. And so they kept it in that percentage of miles. And then if there weren't enough kids, or there were more kids in one place, they would move the school. If it was one of these small, without a basement or anything, and they would move it with the horse teams or else tractors, depending, so that they could get it to where the kids were. So they told me they did it with a stone boat. And being a boater, I couldn't figure out how you would have a stone boat without it sinking, because it don't sink. And it turns out that it's a flatbed, either on runners or wheel, that they would load it on and roll it. So I got it. And I made a glossary in the back because as I was talking with people, they would tell me things I knew nothing about, and now I have a glossary. So anyone else that doesn't know will know. Outside a one-room school, they had cisterns at a lot of them. And one thing that was interesting to me was that West River, they had the hand pump on a lot of the cisterns. And East River, they had a metal stand with a row of these metal cups. And you would wind it, and the cups would go down and pull the water up.
Really? We had a pump.
Yeah, so that's not exclusive, I'm sure, but it was funny that as I was investigating them in East River, there were a lot more of one type, and West River, there were none of that type, and there were all the other kinds, so I was curious. And one thing, you see a fence around a school, and I first thought it was to keep the kids in the schoolyard. See, I know. So now I know it was to keep the cattle out. I know. I didn't know that before. Playgrounds. Not every school had a playground, but some did. If they didn't have a playground, they would figure out games to play. And these are some of the typical things you would see. One thing, though, was a giant stride. Does anybody remember the giant stride?
We didn't have one. Maple.
I think it's been outlawed now, so. But, yeah, you can't have any of those things. But what it is, it's a pole with chains hanging down, and the kids would grab on and run around until they swing out in the air. And I did a drawing of a schoolhouse, and I had that pole, and I just left the pole out. And someone looked at it and said, "Where's the giant stride?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, that pole." I said, "Oh." So I had to put the pole back in because it was important. That was something that a lot of people remember doing. Where did you put things inside the school? And they had
water cooler.
See, and lunch pails. They were lard pails for some, and hooks to hang your jackets. And this picture is the school that's still operating, has the same basic entryway.
We never had that much organization.
These are some of the documents that have been shared with me, and certificates, and it's interesting to see the reader in 1906 and 1923.
That's the report card I still have mine.
Yeah, I'll talk about that too. And then this is a 1941 reader telling about how the kids came to visit their grandpa at the farm. So I would read that and learn what a farm means by reading that. Where did the one-room or country school teacher live? And in this schoolhouse, she lived in the lean-to, and that one is actually demolished. It doesn't exist anymore. But there were different ways. One interesting thing that happened, I was in Hot Springs and I met Quentin Van Orman, a retired highway trooper, and he told me his aunt had been a teacher, Tilly Van Orman. So a couple months later, I met this lady who lived in Selby, who's 90, and she said one of her teachers was Tilly Van Orman. I thought, could that have been the same person? Well, it was the same person. And she had a story where she saved children. There was a flash flood, and she kept the kids in the schoolhouse, and they survived, and everything around them was completely destroyed. And so she became a hero, and they put her on the cover of the comic that was dedicated to that type of thing. And that's a picture of her in 1985. So that was quite neat that the schoolhouse saved the kids, but the teacher had them stay in it. One thing, I've gone to some elementary schools recently and talked to them and tell them about a blackboard, and they all just look at me like, so I have this in to show them, what is a blackboard? They don't know what is it. And then a piano organ was a common thing in a school.
We never had a piano organ.
Yeah, not all. And then nowadays, my topic is a past and present. And so nowadays, this is what a school would look like. And they still have the Washington and Lincoln pictures and the script alphabet. And some of the teachers, they're not teaching cursive anymore.
Right.
And however, some of these teachers are country school students who have become teachers, and they are teaching it regardless. So if the battery goes out on their iPad, the kids will know how to write.
Good idea.
And these are some things you might recognize if you went to a country school, the handwriting, Palmer method, and they did phonics then, which they don't. And of course the globe would be way out of, wouldn't be related to anymore. They had Young Citizens League, and that was where they taught parliamentary procedure, and the kids would actually decide who was going to be the president and the secretary and everything, and assign tasks to each other, and they took it under their own selves to do it. And this is a newsletter that came out after President Kennedy was assassinated. They had an article about him in their newsletter. So it was up to date, it was current. End of year, in the old days, the teachers used to give a little souvenir to the kids. And the other thing I thought was interesting, this picture at the bottom of the boy, there were quite a few different ways teachers could teach kids about classic artwork. This was on the attendance certificate that the child got. And I know I've heard in this last research I've been doing, the teacher would get a magazine that had several of those in the center pole part, and you could cut them out, and then the kids would paste them onto a sheet of paper and have to write up what they learned about it, because there was information about it, and they would have to learn that and write it on their sheet. So I thought that was different. And this schoolhouse, I can't remember the name of it now. This schoolhouse, can you see it?
I recognize it.
Is it yours? I recognize it too, but I didn't know it was yours.
Yes, and what happened was sometimes they would put two schoolhouses together. Instead of building a new big one, they would put two together if they needed more. And then a lot of them had a basement. Even Grover had a basement. And then this one school, it's off, if you go out I-90 in Lyman County, you'll see the basement has those glass block windows in it. the schoolhouse is gonna fall down soon, but it's showing that they used to have that. So there are several different ways they could enlarge the school by adding on to it. These are the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and nowadays students. I've interviewed people in their hundreds up to 6-year-olds. And how did you get to school? This is almost a horse and buggy. It's in the 1920s. This was in Gettysburg. I talked to a lady, I can't think of her name right now. Her dad put a box on a wagon frame, took a window out of their chicken coop, and made a school bus. And I asked her, I said, how did you not freeze on the way to school in this? And she said they used a horse robe. I thought, what's a horse robe? And they had a family horse die, and they tanned the hide and used the hide of the horse. And if you've ever had a buffalo hide or no, those are really warm, so this would be really warm. Because hopefully it would still have the fur on the front, you know, and it would be, but still, you know, I don't know how they lived through it.
They were stiff, they had hide on the back.
Yeah,
They kept out the wind, but they were not cozy like a blanket. They were
Right.
stiff because they had the hide.
did
We
you
had
use one too?
We had one.
Yeah.
We rode in, when it was really bad, we walked ordinarily. When it was really bad, we had just a plain wagon box for the horse, and we put in, sometimes you take a warm stone or something, you know, if it's 10 below 0, we'd take something warm under that horse blanket to hold on to, because it was just fiercely cold.
I know, yes, yes. So how far did you have to go that way?
We were about 1.5 miles from our school. But we typically walked, but when it was really cold, my dad would take us in the wagon.
Well, these are some examples of the horse and buggy in the old days, and now they do still ride horses to school. Other activities that were used in the schools, in World War II, they collected scrap iron, and that would often be centralized at the school. They sometimes used it as a voting place. And then there was a Christmas program. Almost every single person has told me about the Christmas program. And that it was significant to them in some way.
We had the best.
See? I know. One person I got to know pretty well was Governor Walter Dale Miller. I know his wife, and I had said something, and she said, oh, he went to a country school. And I said, well, do you think he would give me his story? And she said, well, you'll have to talk to him. So when I went to talk to him, he asked me, how are you marketing this? Why would you even do it? Would anybody want to read this? He was, you know, not in favor of it very much. And then I explained to him my plan, and he said, okay, then. He thought it was all right then. And actually, I interviewed him for almost over a 2-year time frame, so he would have his memoirs for the family. And they have the notes. I don't know what they're going to do, but so I got to know him quite well. And I asked him about his report card. So this is his report card. And in 1934, these were what they were graded on, habits and attitudes. And I just thought, this is fascinating, the things that they were graded on and the wording of them. It just really says quite a bit, I think, about the time and what the expectations were. This is the front of the report card, and on the front it says to the parent, or the back, it folds, it says to the parents or guardians and to the pupil. And the things they say in a nutshell, to the pupil, it's work hard, play hard, be respectful, you know, the guidance of what is expected of you. And to the parents, it's be involved in your child's education. And if there's problems, come to me, or, you know, we'll work it out. You know, don't hesitate to be involved. I thought that's pretty neat, that they had this right on the report card. And I don't know what his grades were, I didn't really look at that too much. But I think the kids, I've learned by meeting them, they had a purpose, and that's what I've been telling people, that they were raised in a way that before school they had chores, at school there were different tasks that the kids had to do, after school they had tasks. There was a purpose most of the day for them. And there wasn't a choice of not doing those things. The expectations were right up there, and everybody did it. It was a way of life, and I think that really is a big impact on the kids. It was by no means a perfect world, and I have heard from a few people who had a terrible experience, and you know, but I think generally speaking, most people have said it was one of the best times in their life.
Did you run into the ages of kids in school? You know, the kids farm boys did not have to go to school the whole year.
Right.
Did you run into that?
Yes.
So you either had to graduate from 8th grade or go till you were 16. So sometimes the oldest boys in school were almost as old as the teacher, and sometimes that had implications.
Sure. Yes.
Things used to go on in the barn at noon hour. And it was about horses.
See, very bad, bad kids. Yes, and I'm sure. And the bullying, a few times I've run into that being a problem, and in one school there were several teachers because they couldn't deal with kids, they couldn't stay. And then finally one teacher came and she was able to handle them, and that worked. But yes, it was usually the older kids. Or if a family moved into a community that had not been raised the way the community members were, then they sometimes didn't cooperate with the rest, and that was a problem too. But, yeah. Yeah. Okay. You all are represented. I say y'all now that I live in South Carolina. These are who have been in my second book or my third book. Because I didn't meet Sister Kathleen until after I was done with my first book, or you probably would have been in my first book. So these are the names and the counties. So this is representing, if you know anybody, all these people. Now, a couple of them, like Penny Porter, lived in Pierre, and her husband retired, I believe, from Avira.
John Porter.
John. Right, and so that's how she ended up. Sister Kathleen wrote, she has a long rope, she just wrote.
Well, it was just so interesting to me how excited people were that they could talk about that piece of their life. And like Penny, she said, I could write pages. And I said, well, I don't know if she'll put pages in, but, you know, answer the questions. And she wrote an email that she was sorry she couldn't be here today, too.
Oh, good.
They're
Yeah.
on vacation.
Okay.
I was on vacation.
Yeah, I tried to be sure that most people knew about it today. The one thing that really impressed me is,
Look there, there's
see,
I wrote just that short little bit.
this is at the very end of her story. And a lot of the beginning of my database assembling was just to write the name, the county, the school, the dates, and they're in the database. And then I file it in a notebook. And some I read, and some I just don't read right at the time, depending on when I get them. So that lately, I have been reading them and getting ready to actually put the book together. And that's when I found this, and I thought, yes, this is the point I like to try to make, that our school was our family. To this day, we keep track of family growth even as we move to all stretches of the country. We learn well the meaning of neighborhood as our parents gathered on Friday nights for cards while we played all sorts of made-up games. As each of us has become older and gone on to eternal life one by one, we learn even more deeply the bonds that were so securely woven, not just by chalk and ink pens. Those are bonds that were somehow not described even in YCL. They were and are somehow community bonds that seem unique to rural school. And that is why I'm doing this. Because, and I think that's what's missing in our schools now, the big schools. I know Pierre just built a brand new elementary school outside of town and closed 2 neighborhood schools. So, you know, the kids are not going to have this experience. And I have a lot more I could tell you, but how are you?
We've got about 15 more minutes, but I wondered if the cookies are still there and the fruit is still there, if I pass it around, maybe?
Sure. The next part is about the kids that are in school now, and I don't know if you're interested in that, or we can get some coffee. Say yes or no, and I'll do it.
Sure.
Okay. And you can leave anytime, you know, it's like, no, I'm just these are some of the schools that have been restored by a student, and my drawing of it. I'll just whip through these. Maitland. The teacher taught calligraphy, so the kids did a sign for the school. This is one of the students in the 30s who sits in the desk where he sat. And that schoolhouse was in the Hidalgo movie, and they redid the schoolhouse. So I drew a drawing of it, how it used to look in the 30s.
They all had flags.
Yes, there was a law that they had to have a flag.
Because Terry Redlin does a lot of country schools, and he has them gathering around playing with kids.
Yes.
No.
Yep. Each school was required to have a flag. And I've heard some stories too, where they might put the flag up upside down by accident, and somebody will come along and stop at the school and ask, is everything okay? Because that's a distress signal. And so once in a while that happened. This filigree, you can see along the roof there was this filigree. So I stopped to see what was in that building, and it had a blackboard. I thought it had to be a country school, and that's the bottom school. And on the wall was a calendar, 1969. So that was the end, and nothing happened after that in that school. These are the outhouses. Do you recognize any? Yeah. All different shapes and sizes. And one that had fallen apart had 2 seats, one high and one low. All the walls were gone. This is an active school. All of these are West River. That shows the kids in the...
Did you learn what happened to the outhouses on Halloween?
Yes.
They either got tipped over or some of them got hauled to town and left on Main Street.
Oh. Now, which town was it? That?
Del Rapids.
Well, there's more about what
you come to church on, All Saints Day is the next day. The main thing you did is head for Main Street and see if there were any outhouses on it.
Geddes did that too.
How do you know so much about it?
So these are some more. I'll just go through these are all the schools that are operating.
My mom was. Minahan.
You can see these schools are not like the old ones. This schoolhouse is interesting because if you go to Waldrug and 30 miles north, when you think you've actually gone too far, you'll finally get to it. And those kids are 3rd generation. Their grandparents went to the same school. So the ranches are century ranches. And when I go to a country school that's operating, I bring them a flag. It's flown over the Capitol. They fly a flag up and down, you know, they flag several of them up and down in front of the Capitol, and then the governor signs a certificate. So as a thank you for letting me come there, I give it to them, and the next thing I know, they fold it up just the way you're supposed to. So, and here's another group. They're small. Most of them are, a major amount would be 12 kids that I've seen. This school, they ride horses every year for 40 years. The first day of school, they invited me to come. I don't ride, so I was in an ATV riding along with them. But you can see all the kids on their horses. And the country culture is what I'm talking about, what Sister Mary PL talked about. When I was invited to one of the schools for a Valentine party, and I thought I'd be the only one, and all the neighbors from a 20-mile radius came, all the relatives and everything. And so the school was a social center.
One of the things I wondered about, Betsy, when I was reading the book this weekend was, what other things went on in the schools, and did churches use the schools?
Once in a while, it would be one way or the other. Either there was a church that they had to use as a school too, or vice versa. They did have Sunday services in some of the schools. It would depend how far the community got developed, you know, when they first came. And one thing I had to figure out, which I'm sure you think is ridiculous, that when they came, the first thing they did was to get a school system going for the kids, either in someone's home or a church or somehow. And I thought, wow, you know, well, they came from a civilized, they were civilized when they came out. So of course, they're going to have the basic things like education for the kids. So that was a high priority. I don't know what I thought, but you know, you see them going out in the covered wagons and you think, why would they start up a school right away? But of course they would. These are some examples of what they've done with schoolhouses. And the one with the lady standing in the doorway, before I saw a picture of it, they said it was a cake house. And I thought, well, they turned a schoolhouse into a bakery. And then I realized that cake is a supplement they give cattle.
Oh.
So it's not a bakery. So it's, yeah, go ahead.
Did you learn anything about learning English? Because that
Yes.
would be and what that was?
Yes, a lot of the families didn't speak English. And so they would send the kids to school, and then the kids would learn English. And then later, they might even have evening classes for the parents to come and learn English. There was such a thing as night school for parents to learn English. And that was a high priority.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes. This is a way of talking about the Atlas blizzard. In 2014, there was a blizzard, West River primarily, and it killed a lot of livestock. And this is a picture of a schoolhouse near, out there, near, God, I can't think of the name of it. It's, anyway, and horses go in and out of this schoolhouse, and so I just took a picture of it. Well, in the Atlas blizzard, one of the ranchers afterwards, he was going over his land, and he saw this little building, which he had forgotten was on his property, and went to see about it, and the cattle were in the school. It was an old school, and the cattle were in the school, living. So the school saved them during that blizzard. So animals know how to use a schoolhouse. The Sansarg School Museum is an extension of my project. I got people encouraged to do things, and so that was kind of neat. Just they've developed it into a museum now, and these are some other ones that are museums. I don't know if any of them look like where you went, if you went to one. These are all over the state, different places. This is what I do. One lady, kind of like some of you, told me how she went to the Christmas program and with a horse and sleigh because they couldn't ride on the roads in the vehicle. And the kerosene lanterns shone outside on the snow.
Yep.
And as she was describing it, I thought of it as a picture. And so I made it into a Christmas drawing. So this is, you know, my idea of what it might have looked like. And then the next year,
That was us. We always went to all the Christmas programs in the whole neighborhood, different schools, in the
Oh.
bobsled with the horse hair thing, and baked potatoes to keep us warm, our hands warm, no matter what the weather was.
Yes, I know. That's the one thing I learned when I first lived here, and there was a thermometer on the back deck reading 22 below zero. And that wasn't the wind chill.
No.
And I was working for the state, and I thought, oh, they'll call off work. No. No. I thought, okay. So I learned it. I learned how to do it. But this is the next year, and this is in Tripp County. It's a schoolhouse. It's been abandoned, basically, and I just made a story out of it. And I liked it because it was a different shape and style than the first one. And then this year, this is the one I've done. This is Pleasant Dell School in Clay County in 1902. And I have, it's demolished now, but it was on a century farm. And I have some stories from people. And just looking at it, it made me think of Christmas. So that's this year's Christmas. And then these are the books. You can see how many counties. Actually, it's random, so I've met a few people. While living in Pierre, you meet people from other states and things, and so that's how that worked. I've almost sold out of that one. And then this one is the second book. I never expected him to be so big. So the next one will be about like this, too. And I put the Pierre Schoolhouse. It had been a store, and then they used it as a school. So it was a store to start with. And that's why it has that front on it that would look more like a store.
Where was that located in Pierre?
In Pierre, it's down by Griffin, or Steamboat Park,
Okay.
where you go over the causeway to La Framboise.
Yeah.
It's over there.
Okay.
Way.
Yeah.
It's so tiny, you almost don't even see it.
Yeah. So,
And these are just some drawings of the different schools. I have note cards, but I didn't bring them up with me. And I can do, what I could tell you is that if I haven't done your school and you want a drawing of it, I will do one. Even if it doesn't get in the book, I can still do one. And I make note cards out of them. And what I did, I've started some, you can see, and I don't know where, all I had is the picture of the building. So I need to find out where was the flag, where was other things. Because you can't really do a school without a flag. And these, the one, let's see, on the top right is in Wyoming. And a person from California found out about my project, and she was a teacher in Wyoming, and so that's, you know, it's just one of those things where it just goes on and on. And then the one at the bottom is in Kansas, and I met that lady at a conference, and she is the same as Sister Kathleen. She's getting all the neighbors, all the former kids that went there. So that's that. And I have to tell you, I'm dedicating my third book to Sister Kathleen.
Oh, yay. Just because I know the sisters who were so excited about it. It's just fun.
We're country kids.
Thank you, we're country kids.
Well, yeah, but you're more than that.